And
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the OPP podcast. Today, in the spirit of NPR, we'll be having a very academic discussion. Today with us is Mori, the Rabbi, Torah teacher, Michael Barone from Beit Shemesh, Israel. Mori, besides having functioned as a rabbi and Torah teacher for many years, now focuses on funded academic research and inspirational speaking. He decodes inscriptions in the earliest Hebrew script found in Egypt and the Sinai Desert, which he and his academic supervisors are convinced date back to the biblical Exodus. Some even earlier, and reveal the truth of the Written Torah. He also defends the deep antiquity of the origins of the written and oral Torah based on graduate-level textual research and ongoing Samaritan studies and traditions of the living remnants of the northern kingdom of Israel. Besides being a regular guest lecturer at the Migdal Torah Yeshiva, he is an inspirational speaker strengthening Jewish audiences in rational Torah faith through cutting-edge archaeology and confirmed science. Devoted to helping defend the Torah and the people of Israel against minimalists and haters, he has a program called Torah Defense Workshops. There, he educates students in many subjects from history and archaeology to genetics, anthropology, and astronomy, all to tackle science-based challenges to Torah faith, such as the challenge of evolution. As both Torah scholar and graduate in evolutionary biology, he believes there is no contradiction between Bereshit, or Genesis, and the findings of modern science. Although the defender of the rights of the people of Israel to the land of Israel, he preaches coexistence, tolerance, environmental awareness, and responsibility, and the importance of space exploration, all from a Torah perspective. His books are available on Amazon.com, and his academic papers are found at academia.edu under his name. Maury Barone will soon be visiting Florida and Northern California, in just 2 weeks, where he will be lecturing in Jewish communities and visiting students and family. Follow his Facebook page for updates as to when and where you might catch one of his lectures on his inspiring research. Maury, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jared. I really appreciate it.
welcome.
Just really wonderful to be here a second time. And last time it was really great with Abu and Jared. And I'm so excited about this topic because I've been much more of a public person when it comes to my books and articles and frontal teaching, and I've really sort of needed to take a step back from that. Over the last few years, I've been very much the hermit, and this is sort of an opportunity to, I guess, share, with your wider audience, just some of the incredible discoveries that I've made. And I would say that the discovery of the power of Samaritan tradition, not that anyone has some perfect monopoly, that's important, that it's probably one of the greatest sort of, I don't want to call it'd be so dramatic as to call it an earthquake, but maybe sort of a game changer in my religious thought, ever since, becoming Torah observant. We grew up traditional, Sephardic, but, it's when I came to Israel, when I became very inspired 26 years ago to become fully Torah observant. And then began the Samaritan studies, which were sparked by actually something really, really interesting. Are you guys, is this where we're going? I mean, would you like to know sort of
So I'll let you, for example, one of the things that I see people really wonder is when they, first of all, they hear about the Samaritans, right? And they don't immediately know that it's connected to Judaism until you tell them, oh, we have the Torah, and so you have the Torah, so you're Jewish, right? And that's where the conversation begins. And I see a lot of people that are so curious to understand, and that's where the title goes, the missing link between the Samaritans and the Jews. And I think so many people just underestimate how similar, despite some differences, that the Jewish people and the Samaritans are. And I know that you have a really nice perspective on both people, you're really knowledgeable in the history of both people. So we're very excited to hear about a few of that. On the last podcast, we did touch on the Samaritan history a little bit, but I would love for the audience to hear about your story again, about how you discovered the Samaritans, and in a short way. I know it's a long story,
Yeah.
and then
I'll
we
try to
go
make
from.
it as brief as possible. So essentially, I did not come into Torah as, somebody who without an academic background. And,
Mhm.
for me, it was, I have always had a very, very thick BS filter. And, we come from a
Skepticism.
family of rationalists on both sides. But, we also come from rabbinical roots. And, but for me, it was always a process of sifting, to find the nuggets of truth and to discard, the mythical trappings. And essentially, where I found myself was in a very unique position to reach out to do Jewish outreach to a sector of people that feel very lost many times, and that is basically your educated, academic types. So like when they're searching for their roots, whether it be their college years or after, they're sort of stuck in a bind. They either go to these very, very narrow-minded yeshivot, or that's kind of what there is when it comes to something that's very authentic and traditional. And what happens is sometimes when they come in, what is shown to them is something that has a very ecumenical, very open, and very universalist approach. Maybe in the seminar that does outreach to them, but soon they sort of end up, as they get into the study of Talmud and texts, they sort of find themselves both emotionally and socially pressured to kind of espouse probably certain opinions that how can you say, they would not have. In other words, their inner compass, the inner litmus test, probably wouldn't have gone that way naturally. And whether it be denying science, just basic confirmed scientific truth,
Facts.
exactly, whether it be socially. And so essentially, I developed this program called Torah Defense Workshops, which has been so greatly successful. And I've somehow managed, I don't know how,
Yeah, you can
but
check it out in the description.
even an organization like Chabad, invite me, which is just so surprising. I don't understand it, but I kind of do. And that is that I really focus on strengthening the foundation of everyone, if that makes sense, sort of the foundations of it all. And so, at one point in time, about maybe 5-6 years ago, someone threw me a question. What about the Samaritan Torah? The Samaritans are a community that have a Torah. And do you have an answer for that? And I like to pride myself that in my archive of answers, I have pretty much the answer to 99% of questions that anybody might ask.
That's what I
But
like sitting with you, because like you get your answers are pretty like they're backed with pretty interesting research and archaeology. So
thank you. But when I looked up this question, basically all I could find was a particular article by a very important rabbi from the OU, the Orthodox Union, Rabbi Gill's student, who basically gave sort of this classical approach that's very outdated academically towards the Samaritan Pentateuch. And essentially the gist of it being it's too perfect.
Mhm.
And
It's too perfect for like the Samaritan narrative, you mean, right?
in other words, it seems like it's touched up. In other words, that it's
Okay.
more worked on than the Masoretic. So I sort of sent that to my friend, but I then came across this article that was sort of like kind of a straw that broke a camel's back. Because in me, I have the words of my Yemenite Mori from decades ago. So the dream of Jacob, right? Everyone knows about the dream of Jacob's ladder.
The latter, yeah.
Yeah. So whatever side of religion, Bible-based religion, a person is on, a person understands that the site of Jacob's ladder, when he says, "How awesome is this place?" This is the very gate of
In
heaven.
ancient Hebrew, we say "manura amakum ezeh," right? So,
Yeah.
Manora hamakom is okay.
Exactly,
Yeah,
very
I'm
ancient
translating it to my Hebrew.
there you
yeah.
go. Good job. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, the ancients were simple people. They weren't like these deeply philosophical people who were speaking in riddles and rhymes. This was a Torah that was meant for a very practical, hardworking, and simple-minded people. And it is understood that Genesis is all about preparing for the rest of the Torah. So wherever he was at that place, should probably be the place of where the temple was intended, the tabernacle was intended by Moses to be. And I remember my Yemenite Mori, from like 20 years earlier, this was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, telling me, don't think that this site of, Jacob's dream was in Jerusalem. So whether it's the Abarbanel, the Ramban, Rashi, they go through, acrobatics to make it look that way, but he was in Shechem. That always, sat with me very deeply. When you come to Deuteronomy, chapter 11, 12, and you hear out Mount Gerizim, you ask yourself, like, what is this doing here? But again, when people are sort of brought up into it, it's like the child who doesn't even know how to ask. So I saw this article by Rabbi Jonathan Bendov from Haifa University, who's a kippah-wearing professor, a Jewish guy, identifying, who basically said that the narrative about Mount Gerizim as sort of, this original chosen place as far as the Torah is concerned, has a very strong basis, and basically made an argument that there was perhaps Jewish censorship. And then I looked deeper into that rabbit hole, and opened that Pandora's box, and I found no fewer than 3 very ancient textual witnesses. Let me explain to you what a textual witness is. Nothing to do with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
What it is anytime that we find a very ancient text, whether it be a very ancient translation, whether it be something that we found in Qumran, or elsewhere, this is sort of a witness to what was considered to be the authentic or Orthodox Torah of the day. And anyway, to make it really, really brief, Josephus, and there are, different voices from the past.
Yeah.
Exactly, Josephus Flavius, who really represent what was the Orthodox vanguard 2,000 years ago. And anyway, just to make a long story short, there is sort of a third arbiter here in this debate, and even a fourth. There is a Septuagint, and there
Are we talking still about the Torah editions or the Torah?
Exactly. And there's a Greek translation of the Torah that's 100 years earlier than that, a translation into the oldest Greek. And these are Judean Torah traditions, Orthodox Torah traditions. They really played together with the Proto-Masoretic. Masoretic is like rabbinical. So like we're talking, the line that would become, in fact, rabbinical Judaism. And what you discover is that these so-called Samaritan elements, like, for example, not the place that God shall choose, but the place that God chose, number one.
Past tense.
And you shall build the altar on Mount Gerizim instead of Mount Ebal. And, these, in fact, were not Samaritan variants. And in fact, to call them Samaritan variants is incorrect. They were, in fact, part of what we would call the grandfather text.
Where was the Greek translated Samaritan version found?
So would I be able to? Sometimes if you see a picture, it just like says 1,000 words. It's also it's kind of like getting really dry for people who are not such academics.
Yeah.
Could I maybe show my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Just a quick
Okay.
second.
Fingers crossed it'll work, everybody.
Okay, just a second here. Share screen. Share screen. Okay, hold on a minute.
It's right in the middle of the. There you go.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
It's coming
Yes,
up.
perfect.
Yeah.
There we go.
Exactly. So basically, in like one of my last modules in Torah defense workshops, because again, what I tell my students is, what I train, my students to do is to go against people, on the graduate level, because it's a really big letdown if you have, certain talking points of a person who wants to say that the Exodus was a myth and, the whole thing is just a pile of myths, to go against somebody without a lot to go against someone without a lot of knowledge is easy, but you're really setting up a person for major failure, if in a time when it's the information age. And anyway,
Yeah,
so
you're just a click away from
what I do,
encyclopedia.
I have to say it's so interesting to hear you say that, because I grew up in an Orthodox community where we were not taught that there was another script, like for the Torah. Like you're just kind of told that like this is the Torah and it's perfect. And going to college and learning that there was something else, ultimately made me lose my faith. So
yeah, it can have that effect on people. It really can. So, because again, I came from sort of a not really secular, but kind of just a, less orthodox tradition to begin with. It's like, I could take it. So what I do is, first of all, I show them all of these things that seem to be scribal errors in the Masoretic, meaning the rabbinical Torah. And these are things that maybe don't bother people, in the yeshiva world and in the Orthodox world, but they are just.
I would love one example if you can.
Definitely. So here's a perfect one. So people will, point this out. So everybody, according to the Torah, God worked for 6 days, and when did he rest on?
7.
He rested on the
seventh
day. Exactly. Okay, but he finished his labor when? Did he finish his labor on the 7th day?
Well, the Samaritan Torah says, on the 6th day and rested on the 7th day.
Exactly. So what do you see? Here you see the Masoretic. This is the rabbinical Torah. And it says that, and on the 7th day, God finished his work, which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day. Wait, how could that be? He finished his work on the 7th day? So we have the Samaritan coming and say that God finished his work on the 6th day, and he rested on the 7th. Now,
That's
okay,
really
well, maybe it kind of didn't really make sense originally, and they kind of cleaned it up a little bit, how can you know? So it happens to be that this is the Septuagint. Now, Septuagint sometimes gets a bad rap among the Orthodox because the Talmud kind of puts it down, but we actually have 3 textual witnesses, Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Alexandrianus, and you don't have to remember those names, but 3 completely separate ancient manuscripts that all witness to the original Septuagint. Between the 3, we have the Septuagint, and it matches the Samaritan, not only here, but out of every conundrum between the Samaritan and the Masoretic, okay, 2/3 of the time, the Samaritan matches the Septuagint.
Yeah, people don't see how similar they
are. What's exciting about that is that the Septuagint is not just some kind of a doctored text to go make the Greeks happy. It is a very, very serious textual witness in its own right. And we'll even find Hebrew, Torahs that are written that are the Septuagint type, and they are Orthodox. Josephus Flavius is a priest. He's a Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. And when he brings all these details through Genesis, you can tell he's working from a Septuagint Torah. So, anyway, so there it matches. He finished on the 6th day. And there are all sorts of things, like, for example, the children of Greece. In the Masoretic Torah, it says that one of the peoples that fissioned off from the Ionians, the Greeks, were the Dodanim, and there's no such people. And it's interesting because in Chronicles, this is part of the Jewish Bible. In the Chronicles, it says Rodanim when it recapitulates this information. So you have a contradiction, even in the Bible, between Rodanim and Dodanim. That may seem, and it's an easy scribal error to make. Well, what's beautiful is that in the Samaritan we see that it's Rodanim, which is roads, Rhodos, and it's a
way more logical.
And I could just use it's like point after point after point after point. Like, for example, I don't even know where to start, but like Joseph, for example, he's now the viceroy. He's in charge of Egypt, and now 1/5 of the people's grain is going to go to the Pharaoh, right? After the famine and all that. So would Joseph then take move the people to the cities? In other words, leave your fields, everybody. You're supposed to be now telemarketers.
Well, either that or make them work for
fate worse than death.
Right?
Exactly. Now you're all going to be retrained as proto-computer data analysts or whatever. So in the Masoretic, it says that he removed them. Okay. This is not right. It's not even a good translation. He moved the people to the cities. Okay, but that doesn't make any sense because then the Pharaoh isn't even going to get his taxes. So it's very interesting that in the Masoretic, it doesn't say vir oto le'arim with the resh.
Says, so the resh is the dalet. That's the thing.
It's the same problem with rodanim and dodanim. Okay, vid oto le'avadim.
So the Masoretic says hevir, rish in the middle, at the end of the word, which means transferred. But in the Samaritan, it says hevid, d at the end, which means enslaved.
Exactly. Enslaved them into slaves. Now, again, maybe there's some sort of an esoteric, meaning behind the Masoretic. So there's a rule in logic, okay? And that is we look for the parsimony. What's the most logical solution? But again, let's go to the Septuagint. Let's look at the Orthodox Torah from 2,000 years ago. And we see that in the Koine Greek, it is definitely he brought the people into bondage to him. In other words, he enslaved them. And they're just, point after point after point, whether it's what happened with Cain and Abel, even, just for example, my goodness, forget it. There's just too many points.
Well, for those who don't know, there's about 6,000 differences. Just saying, 6,000 differences, small differences.
So I have a question. Are you presenting these like textual differences to your Chabad people?
No, I don't.
Okay.
This is just for us. We're special.
Torah defense workshops, people. When I go there, I talk about my proto-Sinaitic work. I talk about how Joseph is probably the most well attested to archaeologically person in the Torah, and if I'm correct,
as a king who ruled Egypt.
Yeah, and if my understandings of certain inscriptions, are vindicated by my colleagues in the field, it is quite likely that we have inscriptions from the entourage of Moses himself. So that's the stuff that that's the foundation of everyone. But what I do is with my course students, the people who are training, in apologetics and Torah apologetics, what I say is, imagine going to war against tanks on horseback. Like in World War I, when the Poles, went to war.
When they charged the German tanks with just cavalry.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's what you're doing when you go against biblical minimalists, okay, without a Samaritan Pentateuch. Samaritan Pentateuch is not absolute perfection. And there are points in the Masoretic which are definitely older. There's no doubt about that. Just to have a little bit of, I want to put some respect a little bit on the Jewish side. So this is important. There's a verse in Deuteronomy. This is not my line, by the way. I know it's in Hebrew. I'll just explain what I'm doing here. It says in Deuteronomy 31:19, and this is when Moses is going to give his last song, and he says, "Write this song, okay, for yourselves. Write this song, and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths." So when it comes to hitvu lechem et hashira hazot, when it comes to writing, I would say that the Jews actually, the Jewish people, when it comes to a number of different things that I didn't mention, have many correct and very ancient elements to our Torah. If you look at the the Yemenite traditions, the way of writing, these things have been lost to the Samaritans. They no longer have the shitot, the methods of how to prepare a Sefer Torah. There are many, and if you look at a Samaritan Torah, it actually, for example, has these folds, alongside the columns. They have no idea what those folds are. They just, in fact, they don't even put them in the newer Torahs that are coming out. But that is proof that they used to read like the Yemenite Jews. Right. And they did actually once upon a time have public Torah readings in the synagogue.
It's true. The Samaritan Torah, especially the one we reuse for blessings, they have those two folds, but we don't use them anymore. They're just there to hold the Torah.
Exactly. So on the other hand, with the Samaritans, I would say fulfill the second half of this verse, which is teach it to the children of Israel, put it in their mouths. And in that, I would say the meaning of the verses. And I'm going to give you a really beautiful example of this.
Because I know it in Samaritan Hebrew, it says, okay, so I'm not seeing the difference yet, so I'm waiting.
Okay, so again, what I'm basically saying is that when it comes to like scribal traditions, and for example, archaic spellings of things, okay, the Masoretic is stronger, okay, but what the Samaritan Torah does is it gives the meaning, if that makes sense. Okay. And I'm going to give you one example that really says everything. It is the biggest question of all. Does the Torah mean the place that God shall choose, which would indicate that maybe it could be,
it's not Mount Gerizim yet.
Right. It could move on to Shiloh or Jerusalem, okay, or Tiberias or whatever it might be, okay, or 770 Chabad, whatever it might be, or does it mean only in the place that God chose, and that would be like an arrow back to Genesis and Exodus. All these stories of the patriarchs then come alive. What is it? The place that God chose, or will choose?
Or what was it? Jacob wake up and says, it must be the gates of heaven.
Right. So what you're looking at right now is classical JPS, Jewish Publication Society, Torah. We have, the Masoretic here on the left, and this is a traditional Jewish, translation on the right. Okay. Now, for those who don't know Hebrew, I'm going to explain to you this little rule in grammar, and that is that in Hebrew, okay, when you put a yud in front of a verb, okay, that today, like for the last couple thousand years, probably 2,500 years, has meant future. For example, Abud will meet me in Jerusalem. Abud yifgosh oti b'Yerushalayim. Yifgosh. Yelech will go with that yud. Yelech, yavo, yikra. Exactly. Okay. Now, so it's when the Torah says, can you see my screen still?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, for example, when it says, but to the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes, put his name there. There you're going to come. There you have to offer all of your offerings. There.
That shall times. Is the yud.
Exactly. You would think that, right? But what's fascinating is that this is almost for sure the original spelling. This is what probably would have been in the Torah of Moses. Okay.
Right.
However, it didn't mean shall choose. It meant chose. And the easiest way to understand this is Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 9, where he's paraphrasing this verse, and he says, the place that you chose. And he quotes it, the place that I chose from all of your tribes.
Okay.
And what's amazing about it, and this is so exciting to me personally, is that, let me just show this to you here. And again, just want to show you, by the way, the silver lining on this. Whoever wants to say that the Torah is late, like, where am I going with this? Why do I teach this even to Orthodox Jewish audiences? Why is this important for the Orthodox world? Because this proves that the text could not have reasonably come from the Davidic period.
Okay. So
you understand? There's no way that under a Davidic monarchy in that whole period where, the line of David are ruling over Israel, that the priesthood would have created something like this. Because this would undermine Jerusalem completely.
I'm just a little bit confused.
I didn't finish my point, so you should be confused.
Okay.
Just notice here some of the textual witnesses we have. So this is actually when it says you shall build the altar on Mount Gerizim as opposed to Mount Ebal. So, for example, here we have the oldest Judean Greek translation of the Bible. Yeah, no, this was found in Egypt.
Oh no, the one on the right side.
Yes. Wait.
It was in Qumran, the Har Gerizim.
Yes, this was found.
What's interesting is they wrote Mount Gerizim as one word, whereas in Judaism they use it as two words. But we see in this inscription, like the way the Samaritans wrote it, one word, Mount Gerizim.
Right, but I can say you can't really completely hang your hat on that. Like, there's one of the very important elders that I've learned a lot from, in the community, just looks at this fragment like it's the Holy Grail. But in the world of academia, it is contested. There are people who are saying that it's a forgery.
Right, very nice. I heard about that.
Yeah, I don't think that it is, okay, but I'm not a world-class scholar. On the other hand, we have these very, very ancient translations, okay, that attest to the original Septuagint, the oldest Latin translation of the Bible, and the oldest Judean Greek translation, which is 100 years earlier than the Septuagint. It's kind of like the Proto-Septuagint, and it has Mount Gerizim instead of Mount Ebal.
Okay.
Not only
you
that,
shall build the altar.
There you go. But this is what I wanted to get to. I'm glad that I found it. So in Nehemiah 1:9, it says, it's a prayer to God, that you promise that you'll gather them, from the exile and bring them thence, which would be in the land of Israel, and bring them to the place that I have chosen, Baharti, And this proves that,
Interesting.
way back, like 2,600 years ago, in the return to Zion under Ezra and Nehemiah, that the original Jewish understanding of that verse was past tense. But you don't even need to go there, okay? Because in the very same chapter, the reason why I showed you that picture, this is really, really powerful. Check this out. So just everyone, those of you who know Hebrew, those of you who don't know Hebrew, okay? But only in the place, hamakom, asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem. So this grammar would mean, like for the last more than 2,000 years, it would mean will choose. But it's an archaic, it's something archaic. It actually meant chose. How can we know? So whenever you're doing this kind of work, you can't jump between books. It's not really the greatest thing to go jump to a book like Nehemiah, which was in a completely different time. Look at the same book in the same chapter. So if you look down here, same book and same chapter. Okay. So, Moses is warning the people, okay, not to get ensnared after the Canaanite ways, not to become assimilated, right? And he says, because all of these terrible things that God hated, they did, right? See that?
Okay.
Right.
All right. I see what you mean. So Yeshu.
Yeah, so check this out.
Shall.
After they are destroyed from before you, you'll, that's right, I'm not there. Yishamar lecha, Echa ya'avdu. Look at how the translation. How used these nations to serve their gods?
Even though there's a yud, but
how did they use to? Okay, and remember they're destroyed after after you. So this can't be future. Look now at the verb. Echa ya'avdu. That would be what? That would mean, according to that same grammar, according to a later grammar, how will those nations serve? But it means how did they serve? And then
from the same book.
How do we know that it means how did they serve? Are we just going off of this translation, or is it like in the context of the parak?
You literally see it throughout the whole Bible, particularly the oldest parts of it. You see it in the Torah. You see it in the book of Job, which is considered by many to be the oldest book in the Bible. So it's an archaic, it's an archaism. And my mentor, my colleague, my mentor, David Roll, the world-class Egyptologist. So he asked a linguist in ancient Near East languages. And it's a huge honor. But David Roll is devoting a whole chapter in his new book to my discoveries, my paleographic work. And in there he quotes this linguist of ancient Near East languages, and he says, "The rabbi is right." We find the same grammar in Ge'ez, which is ancient Amharic, the Ethiopian. We see it in Arabic, in Aramaic, these Akkadian, these old Semitic languages, this thing that looks like a future tense, but it's the past.
That's so interesting.
That's wild. It really is wild.
So check this out.
Wow.
So check this out. Okay, don't do like that to the Lord your God. Okay, because all those horribly abominable things they did.
Wow.
Even their sons and daughters, they burned. It doesn't mean they shall burn. They're gone. Yeah. They're destroyed. They're conquered. Yeah. But look how they're translating it now. How convenient. Okay. Even their sons and their daughters, do they burn? But no, it means did. And when you see this really nicely,
you can also say kiken yasu, kiken asu, which is already past.
Exactly. So what did the Samaritans do? The Samaritans were very they were practical, and they don't know that this happened. Like if you would say this to any of the elders, they would probably, maybe get upset about it.
They get offended or upset about it because
They
the
would get
Torah
offended.
should be non-changed.
But they did something very genius. They understood that language was changing. And if they're going to leave the Torah exactly the way that it was, people are going to understand shall choose, because there was no more of this archaic form. So they made sure that they're to change it from Yivchar to Bachar. But even in the Samaritan Pentateuch, things like the Song of the Sea, which of course we know is very old. We believe that it goes back to Moses. Exactly, we see this future form. It's really, really exciting.
Wow. Now I'm so curious, like how different would the Ethiopian text be to like the Jewish text versus the Samaritan text?
Yes. So, it's a whole study, and there are so many things that clay together. I'll just show you this one last little tiny thing, and then we'll move on from the textual stuff and talk about other places where, in my humble opinion, whereas it's, I'm not saying it's perfection, but specifically the places where there are holes in Jewish tradition and places that are really deeply upsetting and, kind of hold a lot of people back from becoming observant are sort of filled in by what is really a remnant of what is clearly, probably the closest to the original strand of priesthood from the days of Joshua.
Like high priesthood.
Yes. And so I think this is I think it's Slicha. I think it's right here. Yeah. So everybody knows the Song of the Sea. Last little text thing I'm going to show you. I know it's getting too nerdy for people, but why does it say then Moses shall sing?
Right.
Now, everybody knows that it means that Moses sang. But you see this archaic form, Az Yashir. Okay.
Wow. You're like blowing my mind right now. I've like known that song for like my whole life and always thought it means will.
It means will, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So the two strongest arguments, for the core of the Torah. Obviously, there are certain, verses here and there that have been redacted. This is just obvious, and it's just silly for a person to deny it. Okay, but in both the Samaritans and the Jews, redacted text. But what I tell people is that the redaction is a vessel. It's like a clay vessel to preserve what was. Because we are a civilization meant to last for millennia. We have outlasted empire after empire. People after people, and whole civilizations have risen and fell. So we look at how complicated things are today that were just simple a few hundred years ago, and even a few hundred years ago, things that from a few hundred years before had become complicated. So in the Torah itself, we see that there's some more explanation that's being given. But what's incredible is that this archaic grammar, and the fact that this is a Joseph-centered narrative. I mean, what is Genesis, latter Genesis, if not all of the reasons why Joseph is the chief tribe? I mean, just be objective about it. And so, and anyway, so when you understand that it is in fact a northern Israelite centered text, which makes all the sense in the world, why would one tribe, together with maybe a couple of others, the Shimon and a little bit of Levi, a little bit of Benjamin, why would the Torah, in a sense, be Judah oriented? Makes sense that it's going to represent the great majority, which is northern Israel, 9.5 tribes. And so anyway, it's pretty exciting. And there are many places, for example, the deep covered them, right? Tehomot yechasiumu. Yaradu. Bimsulot kemo aven. So again, we see that in the Masoretic, we see that
this
the
is another
form
example.
survives, but with the Samaritans, which you see not just here, but in many things, all kinds of wordings and that have simply been lost to Jewish tradition that they have maintained. And so I just realized that one thing that could end my career and get me, God forbid, excommunicated or whatever, just happens to be like the greatest ammunition that you could have to support the deep antiquity, the deep antiquity of the text.
I mean, could you really get a cherem for this? Like, could you really get one?
Get what?
A cherem, an excommunication.
Well, yeah, maybe people have been banned for less.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you're not wrong. The rabbis are very insistent they keep their position in the way things are these days.
Right. So what I tell people is as follows. I usually open up this lecture by just showing all of these places where the academics are going to town on the Torah, showing all kinds of contradictions between here and there and there and here and here and there. I said, okay, do you want, all you've learned is sort of the Torah of your father. What about the older uncle? What about the older uncle? Okay, it kind of has a more of a direct, tradition from the grandfather. Oh, we don't talk to him. They're enemies. They're kutim. Okay, blah, 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 blah.
It's like cherry picking who you want to take your information from.
Exactly.
So when you don't, listen to your dad and you go to who the guy characterized as the crazy old uncle, you just, my jaw, I'd say 4 years into this, 4.5 years into this, my mouth just continues to drop, just dry. I think every time that I think that I've gotten to the bottom of the barrel, there's more. And so that's what I tell people is like, this is great. Here you have this answer. Look, the academics are saying, oh, how could Aaron be buried in 2 different places? It's an argument, between the Book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. This Torah tradition shows you what it originally was. And, in places like that, or for example, why does it say in the Book of Exodus, God is revealing himself to Moses, right?
So,
and he's saying, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, continue what you're saying.
Yeah. So he's telling Moses, right? I'm going to reveal to you my special name. The patriarchs, they only knew me by El Shaddai, but my name, okay, Yud Hey Vav Hey, YHWH, they didn't know. I didn't let them know that. And so you look at Genesis and you see the patriarchs, Abraham, Jacob, invoking the name of God, calling in the name of, Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Tetragrammaton.
Tetragrammaton, exactly. And like, what's going on? You can't deny that. And so if I didn't have the Samaritans, okay, I would have a very, very big problem with that. And it happens to be that, by the way, many of these little solutions you will find in some corners of Talmudic texts. There are kind of discarded opinions, okay, among rabbis about these things, but that's not what's being taught. And whatever are kind of like these discarded little, hole in the wall opinions that are so important academically are just like on the tip of their tongues.
Okay.
So very simple. That's not what it means. In other words, it's a rhetorical question. In other words, I'll just show it to you because it's so awesome. This is the problem. And hold on a second. It's it's much better in here. It's much better. Sorry, go ahead.
Here in the part you just showed, where the part of Shemot, it seemed like it was future tense, the Yud. In the part that you just X'd out of it, but in the Machon Maury, when Moses answered, since it says they will not believe me,
No, for sure. So the idea is that there was oral tradition in those times. Tense was a lot like nikud. Nikud meaning like the points. It was something that was communicated orally and understood. Like, for example, in both Samaritan and Jewish tradition, in the synagogue, you had a translator who was translating for the community, verse by verse. The Yemenites have preserved this until this day. So yeah, both of them, are the same, and you just have to have oral tradition to really understand. So that's what's exciting is that originally those verses, Yivchar definitely meant Bahar. You can see it, within the Bible itself. But what I wanted to show you this is really awesome because it's a huge thing that sends a lot of people away from religion. And let's see, there it is. Where do we find? Okay, there was Aaron, of course. Should be right. I don't find it. But anyway, what he says, hold on. I'm going to show, I think it's in Wa'era. Anyway, sorry I don't have it ready, but it's very, very dramatic. God says, I'm going to reveal my name to you, Yud Hey Vav Hey, but the patriarchs didn't know me. I didn't let them know this, okay? They knew me by El Shaddai. But then there's a non sequitur. I even made a covenant with them in which I promised to bring their descendants back to the land. Now, hold on a minute. You're saying something a little bit negative, okay? My great name, I did not let them know, okay? I even made a covenant with them. You sense something. If you're sensitive to text, you understand that something is missing. Enter Samaritan tradition, which has the same solution for this and another conundrum I'm not going to get into.
Like a missing link or something.
It's too much. And it's like this.
I see what you did there, but
the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay, knew me by El Shaddai. And my name, did I not let them know? It's a rhetorical question. Okay. And we have other examples of this in the text. I even made a covenant with them.
So in the Samaritan one, it says, so that okay, so it's hard to translate, you're right. It's like it's in the past, it's like they didn't know about it.
Right,
in the Samaritan.
Exactly. So
my name,
anyway, it's believe me, it's an ocean, it's a veritable ocean.
Right.
So
I want to just I don't want to cut you off, but consider it like a kind of a break question, an interesting question by one of the audience there. It says, what about the fact Jerusalem is never mentioned in the entire Torah?
Okay,
I don't think that's true, is it?
Well, let me explain to you, first of all, what's going on. So Jewish tradition, what Jewish tradition would say on that is that there was a place called Shalem, which was the bastion of Melchizedek. Okay? And Shalem sounds pretty darn close to Yerushalem, which is actually, in fact, one of the names for Jerusalem. Shalem, Yerushalem. And, maybe that's a wink to future Jerusalem. But today, the majority of scholarship understands that I'm going to say is not what it's referring to. That actually is very clearly happening at a place that has been preserved until this day as Salim. And Salim is an actual village just to the east of Shechem. And that's exactly where the Torah puts it. The Torah actually says that Jacob came to a place called Shalem, which is called Pnei Ir Shechem. And Pnei means facing. And the Torah universe always faces east. So the Torah actually tells you precisely where Shalem is. It's directly facing, it's directly east of Shechem. So, and it literally never lost its name. linguistically, Salim and Shalem are identical. And get this, archaeologically, the tell, the mound, goes back to the Middle Bronze Age. And that is the time of the patriarchs. And so, like, everything, comes together. So Biblical Archaeological Review, BAR, okay, is one of the more eminent, biblical archaeological, research publications, okay, periodicals. And their new head editor, he's a big PhD from UCLA, actually wrote a book proving that the Shalem in Genesis is Salim.
Which is not Jerusalem?
No,
The
Salim
one near
is,
Shechem?
right,
That's what you
exactly. Now,
Okay.
the ancient Egyptians did call Jerusalem Urusalim. We have that in the Amarna tablets, Urusalim. But what he proves is that Urusalim was never a cognate of Shalem. It was always a distinct word.
All
In
right.
other words, Yerushalem, what it seems to be is that at the time when King David was making, Jerusalem the capital, and therefore, wanting to unite, both, all of the organs of power, you can say. It's as if to say, this is the real Shalem.
Amazing.
You understand? Before I get stoned for that, okay.
Yeah. Let's say if you didn't get a cherem before, you might get one now. But
Anyway, as we say, tavo kol yom. What I would say to the Orthodox Jewish perspective, this should not perturb too much. This shouldn't really ruffle so many feathers, and the reason is as follows. What distinguishes Judaism from Samaritanism, yay, we're actually getting to the topic of the lecture, like an hour in, is that Samaritan tradition is always looking back.
Mm-hmm.
Jewish tradition is organic, and it is always developing. It is always evolving. And you see this very clearly. Even like the halacha, that the Jewish laws that are being determined today, many of them contradict, the Shulchan Aruch, which was considered to be the code of halacha 500 years ago. Even that, has differences from, hundreds of years before. You have all these new sects that are brand new, whether it be Breslov, whether it be Chabad, with, theologies which are, again, we love everyone. This is not, God forbid, to go cast any sort of a judgment on anyone, and everyone has so much beauty, to bring to the world. And I'm not, here to go trash anybody. But, from a hardline perspective, from a hardline theological, like Maimonidean perspective, okay, those theologies are like really problematic. So, in other words, the only constant in Jewish history, is evolution. And even the Samaritans say, it is such an ancient, cult. It's such an ancient,
It does
branch.
mean Samaritan does mean keepers, so that's kind of connected to what you said.
Yeah. They always say to respect the Jewish people and to respect Jewish Torah. And again, I'm just sort of blowing you away with all sorts of things that they can teach us, and I haven't even scratched the surface. But there are definitely things that the Jewish people can help them understand. I mentioned one example with the Torah, but here's like an example of something that they would not understand, and our tradition kind of sort of, fill that in.
Yeah, that's true. Like the Judaism did affect Samaritanism in some ways. Even Islam to some degree. Like we speak Arabic now because we lived with the Arabs. But like, I really do want to touch on this subject because we're kind of limited on time, and I really wanted to ask you this question, which some people might be wondering about. So we know that there's not many Samaritans left in the world. I'm one of them. There's like 800 and Like we had a baby last week or 2 weeks ago.
No,
800.
that's
Yeah, thank you. 840, something like that. And my question is, why are there so many Jewish people, like much more Jewish population than the Samaritans, even though they lived technically in the same land, although there was north and there was south? Was it the nations that controlled? Were they different? Or did Samaritans just not, I don't know, marry none? Although that did happen. You know what I mean? I'm trying to see, to see what's the
I'll
real,
explain
what's
it
the most
really,
plausible
really
reason.
simply. Okay, the only Samaritans in the world really that still exist. It's only 5 families. Okay, 4 out of 5 of them have the Kohen gene, or a variant of the Kohen
What's that?
gene.
Did we
Okay,
disappear from the screen, or was it only me?
can you see me?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I
Okay,
can see you.
so 4 out of 5 of them have a variant of the Kohen gene. The one that doesn't have the classical known Kohen gene may actually have a gene that could be Levitical.
What's the name of the gene for those aficionados out there?
So the Cohen gene, there are actually 2 of them. There's 2 Cohen modal haplotypes. There's J1 and J2. And the Samaritan priesthood has E1B1B. And actually several Jewish Levites seem to have that as well. Anyway, there's no way that you can be able to delegitimize anyone based on genetics. But what's amazing is that from my research, if we would find like one, haplotype that would be the original haplotype of like Abraham, that would have been like inherited by Aaron, okay, that would go to the original priesthood, that would be J1. Okay. And so essentially all of the Samaritans are Kohanim. They lost that because it is understood that only one very, very thin line, one family, okay, can really be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest.
Okay.
And,
now you're making my chances of being a high priest less, because everyone's a Kohen and only Kohen's going to be
yeah. That's Bood's like what, 4th, 5th in line for the priesthood?
No. There's like 30, 40 older than me.
Oh, 30, 40. Okay.
But if in case everyone is, then I have like 100. Like
he's back.
I'm just saying that halachically, like, in other words, according to law, obviously, it's been, obviously determined that this family that you belong to carry the office of high priesthood. Okay. Mm-hmm. This fits what Rabbi Akiva said. So there's a principle also in research. You try to sort of look for something out of the horse's mouth. In other words, obviously the rabbis probably had a pickle or 2 with the Samaritans. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody as great as Rabbi Akiva, who's considered to be the greatest of the Rishonim, if he says that they are Kohanim, that became delegitimized because they took foreign wives and yada, yada, yada. But it's very interesting that he calls the Samaritans Kohanim. And the moment that he does this, by the way, he's obviously creating a big problem for the Book of Kings.
Right.
That says
although let's just, before we continue, just for those who don't know, for those of you who don't know, you're considered the Samaritan kind of paternally, which means from the father, not from the mother. So Samaritans at some point married foreign women, but that didn't mean that their sons were not Samaritan.
And that happens to be the pattern in every single diaspora. Okay, whether it be Yemenite, Iraqi, Ethiopian, Ashkenazi, Sephardic. Okay, we see that there was intermarriage with local women. They were converted. What I always tell people is that these are not opposite positions, because the Samaritans are very careful that, let's say, a woman who's been brought from the Ukraine or from Russia, that they're going to keep the Torah, that they believe.
100%.
So, in other words, the 2 arrive at the same place. Nobody's marrying like, idolatresses. But basically, when this is a diatribe against the Samaritans, going and calling them Kutim, it's like calling my wife's people, her community, Hindus, because she comes from this ancient community from India. And of course, that would be a very grave insult. And so one of the things that I did as a researcher, in the community for several years, is just trying to really get into their intestines. I'm trying to find the idols. I'm trying to find, the hidden idols in the cabinets. Where's the, where's the
ark?
juicy...
We believe we had our own ark of the covenant. I mean, not our own, but like the Israelite ark.
And I found
the original one.
things.
The original one.
Yeah.
I found a very pure monotheism, an extremely, extremely pure monotheism, just like that of Rav Saadia Gaon and the Rambam. And I found an even stronger aversion, I would say, to idolatry, or how can you say, even idolatrous images, to a greater extreme than we do even in Jewish tradition. So, for example, like in Jewish tradition, until very recently, there were lions traditionally on the parochet, the
cover,
cloth in front of the ark.
Yeah.
But like, that was forbidden in Samaritan tradition. And what's crazy, and this is where it gets nuts, is that because my wife is from the Bnei Israel of India, and I also know a lot about the Ethiopian community and the Pashtun, the Pathans of Afghanistan and Pakistan, of whom I have several students, and I've been studying them for about 20 years. 25 years. What I found is that these traditions all played together. In other words, these are all people with Northern Israelite traditions.
From the
These are the
Northern
people
Kingdom
that the rabbinical world would say, look, they don't have oral Torah, they don't have oral tradition. That's why they say what they say. Sure, they have Torah, they're good people, they're pious or whatever, but they don't have oral tradition. But what I found is it's an upside down world. In other words, a lot of things that are being chalked up in a sense to oral tradition, and it's no problem at all, because if you look in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam includes in the term oral tradition, inventions. In other words, things that the rabbis come up with. And there are a couple inventions, by the way, in Samaritan tradition as well. There are some additions that are rabbinical. For example, Shabbat Atzimot, which is coming up in just a couple of days, right?
Right.
So, for example, this would be like a rabbinical, not exactly a holiday, but something kind of on par a little bit, with
it's not a holiday,
Hanukkah or Purim. So, but it's a much more conservative tradition, much like, there's almost no comparison. But I get the idea of oral tradition developing, but what I found is these people who supposedly have no oral Torah actually have some of the purest oral Torah traditions.
Well, we usually say when someone tells me, do you have an oral Torah? I usually reply by like the text that says in the Torah, ask your fathers and they will tell you, your elders and they will explain to you. Which kind of goes until today, even. Like we ask our fathers how their fathers did it and how their fathers did it. But knowing that there's another verse that says that you shall listen to the Levites from the chosen place. So if there's changes, the Levites from the chosen place, which we believe is Mount Gerizim, shall do any necessary new rules that might be needed. Like, for example, turning on air conditioning on Shabbat these times.
That's a really important point, because, you see this engine of kind of an inbuilt system of reform in the Torah itself. And it's in Deuteronomy 17, where actually Moses sets up, sort of a bastion of authority for guidance, because otherwise there's going to be total civil war. It's exactly what Abud explained. You shall arise and go up to, the Levitical Kohanim, in the place that God chose, and sort of sets, them up as essentially, the authority. Now, obviously, it's very important to understand, and the Samaritans and again, this is a very northern Israelite thing. You'll see this. It's a very gentle approach and a very universalist approach, a very non-dominating approach. In all of these groups, you find it as well. They're not like looking at the Jewish people and going, "Ooh, these evildoers," and "Oh, when are they going to repent?" And everybody is going to become Samaritan.
Yeah, we don't have that. Yeah, you're right.
And that clades together with so many points in their Torah which are not modern, which are so universalist. And, it's one thing for, reform or conservative to sort of come up and say, well, shouldn't we be a little bit more, universalist, economical, kind of take a little bit of the edge off of things. But what's incredible is that among the Samaritans, some of these very, very beautiful points that, in my humble opinion, really sell the Torah, the original Torah, as something that is morally very, very compelling, happen to be just very ancient Samaritan tradition. For example, did it ever bug anybody? Okay, you shall love the ger.
Mm-hmm.
The ger, whatever ger means, because you were gerim in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So what does ger generally mean, guys?
Stranger.
Neighbor, stranger.
No, but is it like
someone who came to live in the
Convert.
land?
Convert. Very, very simple. In Jewish tradition, ger equals convert. There are laws that talk about a ger toshav. Okay, so there's kind of a wink that there is some kind of another kind of a ger. But generally, it's the convert, the convert, the convert, the convert. And this makes its way into Talmudic law. And unfortunately, this is all over neo-Nazi websites. If you're on an empty stomach and it's not late at night and you want to see what some of these haters, what they're doing, they're taking things out of context, and they are demonizing the Jewish people. But I would say out of maybe 50 different points that they try to make, taking these out of context and making us look like these horrible, horrible people, maybe one or two of their points do reflect a very hard line that sort of got cement, written into the halakha, sort of, at a formative stage. And, I tell people, just imagine if we were looking at like the constitution of like Iran, or, and it said this about Jews, we would obviously be, at wit's ends. Well, in Samaritan tradition, that doesn't exist. For example, you shall not adulter, you shall not steal, you shall not murder. In all ways, in all punishments, there is no difference between a crime to an Israelite and a crime to a non-Israelite.
Oh, wow.
Or, for example, the scapegoat. In Talmudic tradition, it is basically brutally, thrown off of a cliff and it is dashed to bits. And by the time it gets to the bottom of the hill, it's like, it's gruesome. So this, the Samaritans have the same tradition that my wife's community has in India. And that is, Ez Azal, you send the goat to wherever it goes. It's just sent off into the wilderness. It's just let to go free.
Instead of sacrificing it.
Right. And again, if you look at people who are trashing the Torah, this is one of the things that they'll pick on. Oh, it's all syncretic, and you see how Canaanite, idolatry crept in. Like, hello? Speak to the old crazy uncle. He's not crazy. Okay, look at the grandfather tradition. Go to this thread of priesthood. The academics say is the longest running, unbroken house of priesthood in the world. You know, there's all these thousands of different cults that we have in the world, in Africa, India, China, wherever, you know, whatever it might be. All these different sects that there are. In the academic world, it's considered that the high priesthood, the office, we're not talking about the family, but the office, the job of high priesthood, the longest unbroken line, is the
It's like 100
Samaritan
generation.
line.
Well, we do believe that we kept track of 137. Like my grandfather is 137th high priest, or some would say 127th. Like that's an arguable number, but
Mhm.
but I heard you say like academically it's 100 confirmed or something like that, until 100 priests, something like
And
that.
what's amazing is that the academics are only taking it to the Persian period.
Persian,
In
which
other
is
words,
2000.
when they say that the office of Samaritan high priesthood is the longest unbroken, office of high priesthood, a priesthood in the world, they're taking it only back 2,600 years. But whoever believes in the core narrative of the Bible, the Book of Kings, Shmuel, Judges, and so on and so forth, you can see very, very, very clearly references to the Kohanim of Shechem.
Okay, which were like Samaritans, because Samaritans never left Shechem, really.
Yeah, and
Do you believe?
you literally see it in these very honest verses in the Bible itself. You see Joshua comes into the land, and there, in verse 24 to 26, he gathered everybody to Shechem, and it says that, he raised up this stone, he wrote the words of the Torah on the stone or stones or wherever it was,
Yeah,
and before the Mikdash. And Mikdash is a very specific meaning in those days. That meant tabernacle.
right.
Before the Lord. And before the Lord always means before the Ark of the Covenant. You see
Right.
that, throughout. So it all sort of connects together. And again, that does not mean that there aren't some very powerful points in which Judaism really informs Samaritan tradition. And like, for example, would you be interested in a couple of those points?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure.
So one of the things that I really kind of grieve over as a person who just loves ancient things and ancient ways and just these very simple, beautiful ways of approaching tradition. And, there's so many things that they teach traditionally that are just so universalist and just so awesome. But what's really threatening it all is assimilation. And what we have is basically an Eastern people, because they've been in an Arab society all of this time, now being thrust into 21st century Tel Aviv. The Jewish religious world, won't recognize them, so they go to secular schools. And what I believe the Samaritans have a lot to learn from the Jewish people is when it comes to education, when it comes to, kollel, when it comes to, certain institutions and certain just means and ways, because now it's like you've entered our world, in the last century.
Are you talking like academically or just
the young people, the teenagers, and Kohanim have actually, even approached me.
It's
and
true.
said,
We don't have enough yeshivot. That's really true.
Yeah, I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's not really something that I can do, but that's really
No, it's
something
true.
that is badly needed. Another thing that Judaism gave the world, and again, it's just, a part of the diaspora effect. Like if you believe in God, if you believe in Hashem in some way, shape, or form, you would probably think that whatever God did, there must have been some reason for it. But maybe one good thing of our being flung to the whole world and coming back is our very strong emphasis. Maybe it's not textual. Maybe you don't really see it in our text so much, but culturally, there's a very, very heavy emphasis on chesed, of kindness and tzedakah and charity. And the Samaritans can't say, for example, that like, well, we were so insanely poor, so we hardly even had enough, food to eat. Well, in Yemen, you had one of the most impoverished diasporas of all, with the community, practically nearly starved. But for example, ma'asrot of money, for the poor, and these kinds of things, were preserved there. But practically speaking, they are just some of the most loving, wonderful people, and I'm very blessed to have had such a. I feel that I now have a family. Not only among my the tribe from which I come, but the Samaritans as well.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm very happy and lucky to have you also as a friend. Like your knowledge about these topics, especially Samaritans and Judaism, was really amazing. And I'm pretty sure you just touched, like just the ice. How do you say? We're just touching
Tip of the iceberg.
tip of the ice.
Yeah.
But
That's the
it is
one.
it is a big thing, and I'm actually writing a book now about the Samaritans, and I'm like really lost. There's a lot of like ways we can take into it, but I think that I don't know if you guys agree with me. We just want to leave the last few minutes. We have about like 10 minutes, something like that, for any maybe philosophical questions you might have for Maury, like something like that.
I have one that I thought
Christian.
of. This one's less philosophy about life, but more of an idea of what is acceptable. All right? The Tetragrammaton. Is it offensive for when non-Jews say it, or if they give like the Jehovah's Witnesses, like they have an Anglicization of it, and I give them a pass for that because it's not a correct pronunciation. But for me personally, I still find it kind of disrespectful.
Okay. My Torah Defense Workshop people, okay? I always tell them, don't you get really upset when a Christian evangelist wants to say, the Jews added and added and added to the Torah, right? And so I said, wouldn't it be exciting to have an outside witness of a people that have been completely separate, excommunicated from the Jewish people, having exactly the same tradition, kind of suggesting that it's super, super ancient?
Yeah.
So I can give you a whole list of these things. And yeah, you're not going to find it there, but I can give you a whole list of really deep oral Torah traditions that the Christian world, no matter how biblical they try to be, are completely out to lunch on. They don't have the culture. They don't understand the language. They're not looking at it through Semitic eyes. And one of them is in regards to the pronunciation of God's name. This is something that Jews and Samaritans have in common.
We say Shema, so we don't pronounce YHWH. So you're right.
Yeah. And so what it is, academically, some people will say some form of it, but every pronunciation of that name will almost invariably be a mispronunciation. It's not just the vowels, it's also the rhythm. So there are, two peoples, as far as I'm aware, who actually have a hidden tradition of what that is. One of them is the Samaritans, and it's not something if it's not the name that they will necessarily give you. It's something that they have hidden. You have to ask the right person, and that's why I've been there picking their brains for years. And the Habani Yemenites. There's also a third among not all Yemenites, but only the Habanim. I tapped into a family tradition of this, and they are identical. And so imagine, Jared, you're somebody respectable, and somebody says, yeah, Barrett is a great guy. You know what I mean?
Hey,
like
Barrett.
Mispronouncing your word, or B-Rad. So it's
honestly,
it's
that's very similar to what I go through anyway. Israelis can't pronounce my name at all.
Oh God.
It's very
Jared.
difficult.
Jared.
Yeah. Jared. I get Jared a lot. I get Jerry way more often.
Anyway, the most important thing that I would like to leave people with, and this is so important, is that if there's one thing that I'm allergic to, it's monopolists. It's people who say, my way or the highway, okay, assimilate or it's hell. But it's incredible that the Torah itself actually, hints to this idea that God, halak, apportioned, other religions to other peoples. And there's no Torah tradition that I know of besides the Samaritans who actually own up to that.
Are you talking about Balaam?
No, I can
Because
show it to you another
Balaam
time.
did
I don't want
have-
to eat up too much time because I've spoken too much already. But I just wanted to say, but it's very powerful that what I tell people is as follows. Ashkenazim, okay, in the Torah world, are very proud of Yemenites. They look at, Yemenites as like, and correctly so, because among Jewish tradition, there's no better kept, community that kept it better. The Samaritans themselves have enormous kavod for Yemenite Jewish tradition. They'll say they're like us. They preserve things like us. And but I always say it's as follows: we are one people, and whatever is a truth that was preserved by one tribe, that should be considered a truth of us all. For example, it just happens to be that the book of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, the core narrative, not talking about necessarily every detail, has really been borne out by archaeology. And that is something that the Samaritans themselves derive benefit from. Whether it be the beautiful, things in Psalms and this and that or whatever, inconsiderate Torah, that makes a lot of sense. The Rambam himself put the later books of the Bible way down compared to the Torah. But why wouldn't we, in other words, if the Samaritans have preserved such truths that vindicate the big picture, why shouldn't we embrace the Samaritans as a full and a part of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, and maybe really raise them up to the place of honor that ostensibly should be their due?
I agree with that fully. I mean, I agree with that fully, and I think it's something that is missing. We also had a guest on, Rudy, who went out to Nigeria to meet some of the Igbo Jews that are keeping traditions, thousands and thousands of miles away. And I do think we need to be way more inclusive and way more understanding of all these different elements of Bnei Israel. Now, I was wondering, my connection was terrible. I'm sorry, it cut out and I had to come back. I think I'd have to get you back on here for another podcast because I have so many questions for you regarding how you equate some archaeological discoveries with the timeline of the Torah and the Jewish counting of the years. Because, of course, in Jewish tradition, it's 5,900 and something, and we have archaeological discoveries from 20,000 years ago. We have Göbekli Tepe 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, I'll just answer that in like a single line. It's the simplest thing in the world. And what's beautiful, it's not like modern people, trying to go figure it out. The Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed makes it very, very clear that that's the beginning of civilization. In other words, Adam, think about it. A human being without civilization is basically a celebrated animal. Mm-hmm. This is something that science and Torah agree on. And in the Talmud, in Masechet Hagigah, it actually talks about 974 generations before the creation of the world. The whole problem, all these issues are not getting the language, not understanding context.
We're all interpreting things too literally.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all looking at the Torah. Both the Orthodox and the secular have the same problem. They're looking at the Torah through Greek eyes, literalism. They don't get the
communication,
culture.
meta text, if you want to call it.
And again, this is not just something that happens to work. You can actually see it, when you do comparison of words in different places. Like the word bara does not mean ex nihilo, something from nothing. So like poof, and man is just like created like, gosh darn it, I'm alive. The word
I like
bara,
how the first human has a
Well-
southern accent.
So what does bara mean?
it means
Created.
a novelty, and the very word when it says wayatzar, formed. So all
Mhm.
three words of creation, whether it be yatzar, whether it be wayivra, okay, or whether it be wayas, those are the
Yes.
three words of creation. They are all processes. And what is that process? This is insane. I don't know, okay, but I don't want to open up too much of a Pandora's box, but it's the quickest thing. There are days, and between those days it says, and there was evening and there was morning, a first day, evening and morning a second day, even morning third day. Guess what? There was no
Not a
sun,
normal day.
and it doesn't mean evening and morning. Nachmanides, as far back as 800 years ago, said this means catastrophe and selection. Catastrophe and selection.
Sound like
If you've
entropy
studied,
and
if you've studied evolutionary biology, you understand that that is one of the key engines of evolutionary creation. So anyway, it's a lot.
Fascinating. No, absolutely fascinating. And I think we need to get you back onto another one of my favorite topics. We haven't really
there you go,
discussed it on
ladies
the
and
pod.
gents. Bring your questions on for the next one.
Yeah.
So I have a great idea. Right around the corner is Jewish Rosh Hashanah, okay, and Sukkot, and there will be the Torah. By the way, another common tradition, just like the Jews read the Torah in an annual cycle, right after with Simchat Torah. The Samaritans also begin a yearly cycle from the last day of Sukkot. So, when a lot of observant Jews, not necessarily the Orthodox, but everyone is kind of starting the Torah again at that time. So you can have me back, and I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in that topic.
Fantastic.
Yeah, amazing.
Definitely.
Love to
Fantastic.
do that.
Be great.
Yes.
It would be great.
Absolutely.
So I
think,
hope I wasn't too heavy or too
no,
No,
fire and
it was-
This was
brimstone.
awesome.
Oh yeah, it was great.
Wish
It
we
was
had more time.
perfectly educational. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're already at an hour 32. We went over our time for this. That just shows you how much we were interested in this.
Right.
Yeah.
I just
Awesome.
want to kind of also personally thank you by kind of hoping you know this recipe about this dish. Do you ever know what
Mother!
this dish is? This is avocado with tahini. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like a healthy snack, what you should do is actually just bring this 2-3 tablespoons of tahini. Just mix them with like one avocado, crush them really well, and then like add a little bit of salt, a little bit of lemon, and you should have like green hummus. Very tasty. Works really great with Shabbat. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Right now. Oh, and by the way,
Abu, can I give you a public thank you? I just want to
course.
say that, do I have access to all of these elders just picking the brains of just like the most brilliant old people? These are people you can't find them on Facebook. You can't find these people, Abu Cohen and Benjamin Sadaka, and
thank you.
several other really key people. But Abud has been my greatest friend, mentor, and student. He's all in one.
Thank you. I'm honored. And the same to you. I always learn from you, and there's a lot. I mean, we should even have a special one with on SpaceX and Elon Musk and all these things.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a great topic.
Yeah, we like talking.
That
about
would be
stuff.
cool. That would be cool.
Yeah.
All right.
We're coming on the end of the episode, guys, unfortunately, so I have to
Yeah,
claim my rightful
thank you
place.
very much, everyone. Please do not forget to leave a like, leave a sub if you haven't already, and share the podcast and this beautiful episode with your friends. And stick to us. There's a lot more to come. Also, support us on Patreon if you haven't already, which will basically help us grow. Jared is about to kind of end the episode with his famous clap, I guess. Although he has his cat on or something like that. Jared?
Mateo will help me end the universe.
Technically, I will still
You ready,
exist, but
buddy?
okay. Open
You ready?
podcast universe, you mean? Sure.
Yes. By the name of the Almighty, he's not. Hey, buddy. In the name of the Almighty Cat. Bye.